Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Sarush. I work for BioPhorum within our drug delivery community, alongside my two charismatic colleagues here, Loic, who's put his hand up, and Scott. There you
Hello.
go. Hi. Okay, so first of all, just say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today for our webinar, Combination Products in Focus. As we know, combination products are where drug and devices work hand in hand, and then device teams gently raise their hands to say, "Don't forget about us," and then we end up on the critical path in the end, anyway. So, so there you go. That's combination products. Excited to talk about it today. Excited about the presenters, and excited to have you all here today joining us. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who are unfamiliar with BioForum, which I hope is not many of you, I just want to explain a little bit about what BioForum is, because we're presenting this webinar today with partnership with SA Media Group as well. So what is BioForum? It's a membership-based coordinated program of change for industry. We represent the biopharmaceutical value chain. We've got 11 different communities, essentially. Each community represents a different area of biopharma, like sustainability, drug substance, development group, etc. And obviously, the community or forum that we represent here today is, and one might argue the most important community is drug delivery. And so what is drug delivery? The drug delivery community, we provide a collaborative platform for the global drug delivery and combination products industry, fostering knowledge sharing and innovation to accelerate the development of safe, effective, and patient-centric device solutions that improve healthcare outcomes worldwide. And that's our mission really here within drug delivery. If you would like to learn more about BioForum and some of our initiatives, obviously, please do reach out to us, and we're more than happy to talk to you about what we are doing in BioForum drug delivery. And speaking of that, every community in BioPhorum has a program, which is basically it's created by our members. And as you can see here, I hope you like what you see. There's a lot of the topics I'm sure that are not disfamiliar to you, but I've highlighted some of our topics here, our collaborations, because those are going to be what we're talking about today, and some of our great presentations and great presenters from our membership organizations. So just to point out first, on EDDOs, we have Bérengère, who is going to spearheading the webinar into EDDOs in focus, a progressive perspective and pathway forward. So really excited to hear that presentation. I've actually heard it already once, and I really enjoyed it. So really excited to hear that again. Following on from Bérengère, we've got the one and only, the king of risk management, the Lego master, Rick Wedge, who he's going to be talking to us about risk management, come together as one, standardization of combination product risk management across the industry. And then following on from Rick, we then have Matt Nicholas, who's one of the nicest guys you're going to meet in drug delivery community, and he's going to be talking to us about platforms, a very important subject, as I'm sure you're all aware. Matt's going to be talking about the current landscape, maturity of platform solutions in biopharma device development, opportunities, challenges, and industry alignment. And then last, but by no means least, we're going to move on to Conor, who is talking about sustainability, a topic that should be at the top of our list. Doesn't always find it there, but it really should be. And that's rethinking sustainability, designing meaningful change in injectable drug delivery systems. So those are our presentations today. Just one mention is that all of these presentations really originated from the Prefilled Syringes and Injectables Europe conference that was hosted by SA Media Group in London in January that I actually did attend. And the purpose of this webinar really was to pull together some of those amazing presentations that our member companies gave at that conference and bring them to a virtual environment to obviously share their thought leadership and share their insights with the rest of the industry as well, and obviously give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. So on that note, I was going to just quickly hand over to a BioPhorum friend, Katie, who organizes the SA Media Group Prefilled Syringe and Injectables conferences, just to talk a little bit about the upcoming conferences as well.
Yes, thank you, Syringes, for the kind introduction. Great to be here today as part of the discussion, and also hear again from some of the speakers we had at our Europe conference. But just wanted to give you a bit more context around SAE and our PFS and injectable drug devices series. So the aim of our series is to really bring together the PFS and combination product development community through these conferences. We have our Europe one in London, our East Coast conference in Boston, and our West Coast conference in San Diego. And across these events, we aim to bring together pharma, biotech, device developers, and regulators to connect and discuss the latest developments in the combination product space. And whilst each of the conferences have their slightly differing regional priorities and strengths, the core pillars are the same, really: the peer-to-peer engagement, the knowledge sharing, and really connecting on the latest challenges and developments in the space. And it's great to see throughout the year, as we move through the different regions, how the questions, the insights, the themes really do evolve, and how the conferences really are shaped by the speakers, the teams, the companies we have at the conferences. So as Syringes mentioned, back in January, we had our Europe conference in London, and I just wanted to highlight some of the really key themes that came out of that conference. And Syringes has already mentioned them, and a lot of the presentations today go back to them. But first one, there was a real focus on enabling self-administration and usability, really looking at how teams are designing for patient and real-world use, and the importance of looking at that early in development. Large volume and complex injectable delivery was also a key topic, and we had an afternoon dedicated to this, really looking at how challenging formulations, as they're making their way through the pipeline, what teams are doing to really look at delivering these, and the importance of thinking about this early in development. Regulatory considerations came up a lot too, especially looking at the differing expectations across regions. Sustainability too, we had an afternoon on this, but it became apparent it's definitely not a standalone topic, and it's very important in device decision making and long-term strategy too. And again, platforms was a key topic that came up throughout, and I know Matt will be speaking on this today. So we'll have this conference again next January in London, but in the meantime, we have our upcoming US conferences. So we have our East Coast conference in Boston in April, and then again we'll have some BioPhorum collaboration presentations there, which is really exciting. So that'll be next month in April, and then we have our West Coast edition in San Diego in June. That's it from me really, but we've got the QR code there if you want to take a quick scan to look at the upcoming conferences and a bit more information, or head to the SMG conferences website, you can find out more. But otherwise, really looking forward to the presentations today and the discussion.
Here's our great, amazing presenters for today. Their titles, their names, their lovely faces. So I'm going to, we're starting with Bérengère on the topic of EDDOs in focus.
So my name is Bérengère Paris, and I'm working at Novo Nordisk in global regulatory affairs, and more specifically in the regulatory device team. I'm a pharmacist, and I have more than 13 years of experience within CMC and device regulatory affairs positions in the pharma and medtech industry. My focus for the past 6 years have been on combination product mainly. And here's why I'm presenting something about EDDOs today. So I will speak around EDDOs in combination product, and I will speak mainly around the progress, perspectives, and pathway forward. So here's a quick overview of what I will dive into today. So first, some background information for those who are not familiar with the EDDO guidance and the history. Then I will give some definitions and the FDA expectations for EDDOs in combination products. I will then focus on an example of implementation of the EDDOs principle into development processes. And finally, I will give some perspective on the impact on submission practices and an expected global outlook. So first, some background. As some of you may know, so we went from essential performance requirements, also called EPRs, to essential drug delivery output, EDDOs. And I will say EDDOs quite a lot during that presentations. So what has happened is that FDA has applied this essential performance requirement concept since 2016. However, there was a lack of formal guidance from FDA, and it created quite a lot of confusions in the industry. And that's why in 2019, the industry officially requested a guidance. A draft guidance was issued for commenting in June 2024. And finally, this draft guidance provides some clarification and also introduces FDA's current thinking with the new terminology EDDOs, which replace EPRs, which have been previously used by FDA in the communication with the industry. What we know of today is that FDA is working on the final guidance, but we have no clear information on when we can expect that final guidance to be released. Now I am going to speak into definitions and expectations for EDDO in the combination products. On this slide around scope and definitions of EDDOs, I hope I will not give you anything new compared to what we can already read in the guidance. First of all, EDDOs apply to devices and device constituent parts of CDER-led and CBER-led combination products, which are intended for delivery of a human drug, including a biological product. Those EDDOs are defined as a subset of design output necessary to ensure the drug delivery function, which is the intended dose to the intended delivery site. FDA intents in the guidance is the system-level performance, dependent on the device design rather than the component specification. And in addition, EDDOs should be distinguished from user-dependent functions, which should remain within the human factor file. Here again on that slide, nothing new compared to the guidance, where the expectations for the EDDO process are described, and they are divided into three aspects. The first one being the identification of those EDDOs. The identification principles are now provided, and everyone is very happy with that. And this is done by using existing design control and a filtering process. It then helps the project to focus on design and development efforts. Second part of the process is the controls which are needed to ensure that the product meets quality standards for drug delivery function. It can be divided into two sub-aspects. The first one, design verification and the validation activities, and the second one being risk-based control strategy. I will talk a little bit into that later. And the last process being the maintenance to ensure that any changes made during development or post-market are evaluated and that they preserve the quality of the drug delivery functions. All of this at the end results in a regulatory submission in which the information and the data regarding EDDOs should be provided. Now, in the second part of the presentation, I will try to give some perspective via the Novo Nordisk example on implementation of the EDDO principle into the development processes and strategies. It is clearly defined in the guidance that it is a draft guidance that was distributed for common purpose only. In addition, we also see that FDA continues referring to EPRs in their communication with the industry. Here is a snapshot of a recent communication, a recent communication with FDA. And I believe it was part of a meeting interaction. And in that, you can read that FDA states that the guidance is still in draft, not yet final. Therefore, functional aspects of the device are referred to as essential performance requirements, EPRs. However, in Novo Nordisk, we decided to implement this draft guidance into our internal development process. The main reason for that being to ensure portfolio alignment within the company. The first aspect of the process, which I described earlier, is the identification of EDDOs, and we need to do that within a global regulatory framework. In Novo Nordisk, we introduced the terminology essential output, which includes EDDOs, the CQAs or device CQAs, and also primary functions, which are applicable only for the drug delivery devices that falls within the scope of ISO 11608-1 2022. I will not go into details into the definition of each term, but what they all have in common is that they focus on accurately delivering the drug dose. However, they're not identical, and that means that some EDDOs, primary functions, and CQA might overlap, and some won't. Similar development efforts are required anyway for all three concepts, and that explains why we have introduced a common internal terminology for it. If we look a bit closer at EDDOs and CQAs, we know that for combination product, FDA acknowledges that the term design output and EDDOs could be interpreted as analogous to the ICH guidance for the drug product terminology for critical quality attributes, CQAs. And this is clearly stated in the guidance. We can make a parallel then between pharmaceutical development and design control, where we see that design input concept is similar to the quality target product profile. Same for design output being similar to the quality attributes. And finally, we see that EDDO concept is then similar to the critical quality attributes or CQAs per ICH Q8. And this strong similarity between the two concepts means that there is a need for very strong collaboration between CMC and device organization. If we move on to the second aspect of the implementation of EDDOs, it is the implementation of a risk-based control strategy. It is clearly defined that each EDDO must have a defined control strategy, and the control strategy should be risk-based, meaning that not the same level of control is needed for all EDDOs. It means that we need to assess the risk level first, and then place the cursor on the combined level of risk line. And I will try to get a pointer that might be a bit easier. So we need to place the risk of each EDDOs on that line. We need to look at it as a combination of the severity or the impact. A high severity would place it on a high risk. Then we need to look at the complexity of the device design or the system level, and the same, a high complexity, meaning a high risk. And finally, we need to look at the level of knowledge that we have on that device, and a high level of knowledge could reduce the risk. The number and types of control would then depend on where on this scale we place the EDDOs, and then the amount of information regarding the control strategy that we will include in the application should correspond on the product risk or where we placed, again, the cursor on that combined risk line. There are different types of controls with different effectiveness level. The most effective on top here being a robust design control by design verification and validation. Then we will have the upstream control, such as in-process control, control of process parameters, control of incoming materials, purchasing controls. And finally, the downstream control or lot release testing. And they can be, those downstream control can be considered less effective. EDDOs can be then control either upstream only or downstream only, or a combination of upstream and downstream control for the high risk level EDDOs. A robust design and robust process control will be preferred over end product testing due to the higher effectiveness of the control. It is also expected by FDA that we will generate and provide manufacturing consistency data to support the adequacy of the proposed control strategy. And I can say that in my experience, adequacy of the control strategy is usually where we are challenged the most in Q&As with FDA. Now let's have a closer look at the impact of the guidance on submission practices. The information and data that are to be submitted are somehow clarified in the guidance, and that gives more insight into what is expected by FDA. Or we name the device functionality, so either EDDOs or EPRs using the old terminology, or even via another internal terminology is up to us, as long as the guidance is still in draft. For an IND application, we need to provide summary of EDDO data reflecting the development stage of the device. An extra focus on safety-related EDDO should be given, and we need to identify and assess the safety of the system level within its use in a specific trial, which is done in a more controlled environment. Then for marketing application, we should submit much more extensive EDDO information and data, and that goes from identification of the EDDOs to stability or shelf life data and control strategy. On this slide, I try to highlight the common project and submission challenges that we face in EDDO implementation. First of all, the device and the drug organization are very often separate organizations, and identification of dependencies between drug and device links back to defining CQAs and EDDOs, which are very much interlinked. This needs to be done early in development, and across collaboration between device and CMC organizations is very crucial. Second of all, the control strategy information and data is scattered around the Module 3 document, or at least as we build it in Novo Nordisk, and it means that it's not always optimally presented in submissions. On top of that, we are still receiving inconsistent feedback from FDA, and we need to capture those learning. It means that we need to ask ourselves the question, was it a one-time request? Or will it be systematically requested in future submission? And finally, without a final guidance, there will still be some uncertainties on FDA thinking, making consistency across projects maybe a little bit difficult. To end this presentation, I will try to give my perspective on the global outlook. So there is a need for global harmonization. The industry player can continue to push for harmonization between EDDOs, CQAs, and ISO 11608. Then this EDDO approach by FDA could have a broader impact across other regions and also influence other regulatory bodies, even indirectly. We can then anticipate a global impact. Even though we recognize that EDDOs primarily cater to the FDA rather than EMA and other regulatory authorities, we can reflect whether similar requirements will emerge in other regions.
Hopefully, right. Thank you, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Rick Wedge. I work at the Pfizer Devices Centre of Excellence over in Cambridge in the UK. My team are responsible for pulling together design and development files, as we now call them, and risk management files for some of the more complicated combination products within Pfizer's portfolios, things like auto-injectors, pre-filled pens, that kind of thing. And today I'm going to talk to you about standardization of combination product risk management across the industry. Quick agenda of what I'm going to talk about. We'll start with a problem statement and what's currently going on in the industry. The development of the common hazard library, some of the work that we've been doing with BioPhorum. Then we're going to cross into sort of linking drug and device risk management. This is becoming very much a hot topic, and I spent all last week in Copenhagen as part of Joint Working Group 1 looking at 24971-3, which is a specific technical specification which will relate to combination product risk management. Some of the cross-industry collaboration that's been going on, some future initiatives, and finally some conclusions and acknowledgements. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm sure you're all familiar with the age-old conundrum represented by this triangle: fast, cheap and good. It's something that everyone wants, but is fiendishly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. You can have something cheap and quick, but it'll be low quality. You can have something fast and good, but it'll be expensive. And finally, you can have something cheap and of high quality, but it won't be quick. The problem here is our friend COVID and products developed during the height of the pandemic tend to cast a bit of a long shadow. High quality products were placed on the market very quickly, and now this is the expectation on all products, irrespective of the indication. Granted that money wasn't an objective during the pandemic, and rightly so, a global emergency was taking place, but the sense is now that the third factor is starting to be a consideration, which leads us back to our original puzzle. So with that in mind, and for the purposes of this discussion, I'll take cost out of the equation, but that still leaves the problem that the speed at which we're required to bring products to market is steadily increasing. That's all very nice, but we have obligations in terms of both quality and regulatory requirements that we still need to meet, irrespective of the time pressures bestowed onto us. We want to be able to release products onto the market quickly, but we also need them to be safe and effective. This represents a challenge in many avenues of product development, but risk management is where we'll place our focus today. So what's everyone currently doing? Let's imagine, for a start, we have a pre-filled syringe system which is being used to contain 3 separate drug products: one for atopic dermatitis, one for rheumatoid arthritis, and one for a vaccine. The pre-filled syringe configuration is exactly the same, but the drug products are completely different. The result of this is we end up with 3 separate risk management files, which might not be overly consistent, as it's perfectly possible, especially within a large organisation, that 3 separate teams have been used to generate them. Notwithstanding the different harms the 3 patient populations may be exposed to in the event of a dosing error or such like, all the device-related hazards, hazardous situations and harms should be the same, given it's the same device configuration. This is where we go back to the 3 separate teams constructing these files, specifically clinical and medical experts. Imagine a glass breakage in our syringe. The clinician assigned to the dermatitis drug may say it leads to a cut, an S2 harm. The clinician working on the arthritis drug may be more conservative and state that a laceration, potentially an S3, is more likely to happen. This then automatically leads to inconsistency between the risk management files for the same hazardous situation. A problem is then caused down the road from market teams who may have to respond to complaints via certain thresholds and therefore want the risk management files across platform devices to be as similar as possible. All we therefore achieve in this instance is that we burn time in trying to realign after the fact. What can we do to solve this problem? From a high level, this is what we're aiming to achieve. Irrespective of the drug product, what we need to develop is a library of common hazards, hazardous situations and harms, incorporating severity and, if possible, P2 values. This library can be leveraged every time a new drug product comes along, leaving teams only with the task of determining the harms and severities associated with dosage of the drug product. Extending this idea, what we could also do is develop the risk assessments such as FMEAs, etc., which make up the rest of the risk management file, again leveraging the base case every time a new drug product comes along. You still end up with 3 risk management files at the end. You need to, as you may be asked to provide specific risk assessments as part of the submission process or present them in an audit or inspection, but they will at least be consistent and a great deal of time will have been saved in the development process. In terms of where the library of common hazards, hazardous situations and harm sits, it's worth having a brief overview of the risk management system as a whole. In normal circumstances, the process runs as follows. A risk management plan is written detailing how the process will be implemented for the product in question. This will include, but is not limited to, items such as responsibilities, stroke accountabilities, the types of risk analysis that will be undertaken, how risk will be evaluated, the criteria for risk acceptability, and activities in the production and post-production space. From there, the characteristics related to safety of the product are identified and used to develop a preliminary hazard analysis, which contains the hazards, hazardous situations and harms typically encountered during both normal use and fault conditions of the device in question. These hazards, hazardous situations and harms are then used in conjunction with the secondary risk assessments such as FMEAs to develop the risk management traceability matrix. This document details all the hazards, hazardous situations and harms which arise during the design, manufacture and use of the device, their accompanying risk control measures, how the implementation of these risk control measures is verified, and whether any new hazards have resulted from their implementation. The final piece is the risk management summary report, which contains benefit risk analyses at both an individual risk level and an overall product level, which is used to determine whether the product has the requisite safety and effectiveness to facilitate commercial launch. Where a common hazard library sits is above the process. The risk management plan would detail its use with all the relevant hazards, hazardous situations and harms being transcribed from the document into the specific preliminary hazard analysis for the product in question. Additional hazards relating to the drug product or specific design, use or manufacturing features could be added at this point. At the moment, the common library just contains hazards, hazardous situations and harms, but there is a persuasive argument that says that the identification of characteristics related to safety, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here, characteristics related to safety should also occur at this higher level. Indeed, it's something I would highly recommend given the similarity you would see across a given platform. So where do we start? As I've said, the preferred way is to identify the characteristics related to safety and from there the hazards. Note that this is just done for a platform device, as there are some things that can't be completed until a suitable drug candidate comes along. As before, you need to define the hazardous situations, harms, severities, and P2 values, if you're using these, of course. The example I show here relates to biological hazards. What has been done is that we've identified hazardous situations associated with the administration of drug product, exposure to microbes on either packaging or external surfaces, and injections given with either unclean hands or with unclean skin. These can be used across the platform as they are unlikely to change, even when using a different drug product. From there, this hazard category and associated hazardous situation and harms can be invoked across across the applicable risk assessments. As earlier in the talk, Note that these are fairly generically written and can form the basis of the common library, in addition to any other common hazards which have been defined as part of this process. As I've mentioned, the first port of call when developing any hazard analysis is the determination of the characteristics of the product related to safety. Given this is one of the central tenets of risk management, this should be old hat to most of you. You simply use the questions of Annex A in ISO TR 24971 to determine the characteristics and hence define the hazards. In order to answer these questions, you need to consider information from the following inputs, and these are complaints and adverse events, non-conformances, CAPA, clinical evaluations, audits, management review, information from predicates, media, and at last but not least, standards, regulations, and guidance. What you can then do with respect to combination product, and what we've done within Pfizer, is add a couple of additional questions. In our case, these questions ask whether the delivery method could have an effect on the drug product, whether the drug could affect the delivery method, or whether the patient could affect the delivery of the medicine. We also focus on whether any part of the manufacturing process could degrade or damage either the drug or device constituent parts of the combination product. And it's worth noticing here, and this is hot off the press, in the 24971-3 technical specification, we've gone through and we've reworded a lot of the questions that are in 24971, so they're more applicable to combination products. So you've got the questions that we've added internally within the Pfizer system, but also you've also got a little bit more granularity around these questions for combination products as a whole. So watch this space for that. That'll come out probably later this year, but it's worth putting that across your radars. So in this slide, I wanted to focus, in this next slide, I want to focus on how you might use standard questions to determine the hazards associated with the intended use of combination products. Firstly, we define what the intended use is, how the dose might be administered and by whom, and the indication for the drug product. We then discuss frequency of dosing, the components of the device constituent part, and how it might be disposed during following use. Using this information, we can determine the characteristics which may affect safety. From there, we can go on to derive the various hazards associated with these characteristics. I've taken a bare bones approach with the hazards here, using only the categories described in 14971, but you could take a more granular approach should you wish to. I find taking the bare bones approach here to be useful in the first instance, as it's easier later in the process to associate failure modes, use errors with a broad hazard category. It also ensures that the documents are not larger than they need to be, and you can minimize potential repetition. Coming back to the hazards we defined using the questions specific to combination products, you can see that a number of hazards have been identified which can then be taken forward into our main risk analysis documents. As you can see here, there's a broad range of hazards which can be identified for a simple pre-filled pen from which this information is taken. From then on, it's pretty much business as usual. Colleagues from clinical, medical and safety functions are engaged to define the hazardous situations and harms, their severities and P2 values associated with each of the hazards. This forms the basis of a preliminary hazard analysis. Some of you may be wondering how we derive the hazardous situations for the drug product manufacturing process when it isn't required per ICHQ 9. Hold that thought, I'll come back to that shortly. Once you've developed a common hazard library, its use can then be built into the risk management process, whereby the common hazards are assessed at the beginning of each project and then integrated into the product-specific risk management file. When new hazards are identified at the product level, which have the potential to be fed back into the common library, these can be added to the library, which can then be implemented to subsequent products using that platform device. Now, we've talked a lot about common hazards relating to things we may encounter of the device, including biological agents, cuts, etc. But what do we do about specific drugs? Obviously, we can't define specific harms relating to dosing hazardous situations without knowing precisely the drug products we're using. But what we can do up front in our common document is define the hazard categories, delivery quantity and delivery route, for example, and the associated hazardous situations. This saves time in the long run, in that all we need to do when a new drug product comes along is define the physiological harms and their corresponding severities associated with the specific drug products, rather than going back to the start and working out the hazards and hazardous situations from scratch. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned how we can link a failure mode observed in one of our risk assessments to a hazard category defined in the preliminary hazard analysis, and how both can be documented within the risk management traceability matrix. Note that FMEAs are not the only method we can use to assess risk. Indeed, we shouldn't solely rely on FMEA as a tool if we want to ensure full ISO 14971 compliance. However, in the drug product world, especially in manufacturing, a good proportion of risk assessments are conducted in this format. So here's how it works in practice. During the development of the manufacturing process, a failure mode whereby a plunger rod is incorrectly placed is observed. This in turn leads to a potential breach of container closure integrity. As this is a source of harm to the patient, this can be considered as falling into the microbiological hazard category, as defined in the preliminary hazard analysis. From there, we go to the administration of contaminated drug product hazardous situation, with all the severities and probabilities associated with that. An important point to note here is the information is taken from the hazard analysis and will ultimately feed into the risk management traceability matrix, more of which in a minute. So as I've already stated, the chief methodology for risk assessments in the drug product manufacturing is the FMEA. However, we already know that hazardous situations are rarely defined, as they are not an integral part of ICHQ9, and as a consequence, the risk management assessment is rarely documented in ISO 14971 terms. How can we link these risk assessments with the rest of our risk management file to give a holistic package? One possible way we could do this, certainly when we consider the risk management activities associated with QBD and determination of the control strategy, is detailed here. If we start with some of the activities relating to the drug product risk management process, our first step is to conduct a criticality or cause and effect analysis. In this exercise, we determine whether the failure to meet a certain attribute will have an impact on the safety or efficacy of the drug product, and the relationship between parts of the manufacturing process and the ability to meet this particular attribute. From this, we can determine the critical quality attributes and critical process parameters, both of which feed into a drug product process FMEA generated as part of this exercise. This is all well and good, but at this stage we don't have a definitive link with the devices side of the risk management process. Yes, we've determined the critical quality attributes and the effect of the manufacturing process on them, but we still haven't linked it to either the patient or user in a way that is commensurate with ISO 14971 or AMI TIR 105 approaches. This is where the hazard analysis comes in. If we look at some of the frequently observed CQAs, we can translate a failure to meet them into hazards which are defined both in ISO 14971 and in the hazard analysis developed for the device constituent part. For example, a failure to meet a CQA based around sterility becomes a biological hazard. A failure to meet a specified concentration becomes a hazard related to the quantity of drug being delivered to the patient, and so on. What we can then do is look at our hazard analysis, where the hazardous situations and harms for such hazards are already defined and assessed according to the criteria documented in our risk management plan. This essentially converts the consequences of failing to meet a CQA into the same language used for the device constituent, and allows us to connect the drug product risk assessments to the device risk management file. By doing this, we can link a failure mode identified in the drug product process FMEA related to, for example, sterility, to the biological hazards defined in the device hazard analysis. This will give a failure mode which can then be documented in the risk management traceability matrix, resulting in a document that spans all risk assessments and provides colleagues in the post-production space a convenient entry point into the risk management system for the entire product. Examples of how we can take the drug product critical quality attributes as defined in the process understanding plan and convert them to hazards and hence hazardous situations are shown in this table. We can then take a bioburden or sterility CQA, convert them to a biological agents hazard, and from there into an administration of biological agents into the patient hazardous situation. Similarly, we can convert deliverable volume into a delivery quantity hazard and partial dose hazardous situation. Note that this list is not exhaustive and merely illustrative of the approach that could be taken. We've spoken a lot about theory so far, but what's going on in the industry at the moment? As I've already said, inconsistency in the way that hazards, hazardous situations and harms are determined is rife within companies. It stands to reason that this also happens within the industry at large. To that end, my colleagues and friends at BioPhorum have instigated a risk management work stream to try and develop a common library of hazards, hazardous situations and harms for a prefilled syringe platform with the aim of creating a standardized approach across the industry. Why are we doing this, you might ask? Well, the aim is to provide a repository which will hopefully reduce some of the inconsistency that's often seen. Inconsistency that ends up on the desks of regulators, which I think we can all agree no one wants. In terms of the impact of this inconsistency, there are a number of things that occur. Firstly, it's our old friend time and the propensity of misalignment to burn it. Having a common library would hopefully reduce the hours spent quibbling on whether a cut is an S2 or an S3. Secondly, if you have an inconsistency, you then run into issues when trying to create platform risk management files using information from products that have been on the market for a number of years, and those coming to you via new product development. Next, it is our belief that these differences can slow down the time it takes for regulators to review documentation. If they knew what they were getting for the common hazards experienced in a particular product, they would have more time to focus on drug product specific aspects. Following on from this, an inconsistency in the assignment of severity levels can lead to a difference in reporting thresholds. One manufacturer may report something as an S4, meanwhile another may have assigned an S2 for the same harm and therefore sees no need to alert the regulatory authorities. The upshot of this is we don't get a clear picture of what is going out there due to either over or under reporting. The penultimate point here is that inconsistencies in severity will affect sample sizing in DVT from one company to another. This will lead one company testing more than is required with all the cost burden that may entail, and one company under testing, which may lead to regulatory issues upon submission. Finally, and as I've said a number of times, all this can necessitate a repetition of work and can increase quality risk. So with all this in mind, the risk management group has set about developing a cross-industry hazard analysis library with the aim of solving some of these problems. There are many benefits to this approach, which include a standardized baseline across the industry and a means of supporting internal decisions by use of an industry benchmark. This would in turn facilitate a focus on what really needs to be looked at and allow time and resources to be allocated accordingly. In addition, submissions would be more consistent and a framework would be provided for other platform devices such as prefilled pens, on-body injectors, etc. So where are we? How far have we got? Firstly, we've established a timeline with the goal of publishing the library by Q3 this year. As part of that, team members have provided their internal libraries and shared their severity scales. This has allowed us to develop a common severity scale, which you can see on this slide. We're currently discussing P2 values and have put our initial focus on biological hazards, sharps, industries and biocompatibility. Watch this space as the year continues for more. Up to now, we've focused on how we can generate drug agnostic preliminary hazard analyses, but why stop there? On any given platform, the other risk assessments in the risk management file are also likely to contain common elements. So why wouldn't we develop common versions of these, which only involve us coming along and adding drug product specific harms when the new product is initiated? This can then be used to generate the risk management traceability matrix, which, let's face it, is never a pleasant document to put together and will save even more time in the development process and also add consistency across the platform. Which brings me to discussing how we could possibly build a platform with respect to risk management files. How can we do this? A possible approach is consider building parent and child risk management files in a modular fashion. Firstly, we want a risk management plan. Now, most risk management plans contain boilerplate information. Why not develop an overarching plan at the platform level, the parent, if you will, and then add an addendum or child document containing all the pieces you need concerned with the specific drug product, e.g. the patient and user profiles, etc. This way, you only need to raise the plan once and prevent some of the more tiresome repetitive tasks related to document reviews, which I'm sure we all encounter in our daily lives. Similarly, this approach can be applied to all the various risk assessments. In fact, we're now in a world of fancy product lifecycle management systems where we can develop, say, a single hazard analysis containing all the hazards, hazardous situations and harms, plus those related to each new drug product that comes along. The beauty of this is that if asked to show the hazard analysis for the dermatitis presentation earlier in audit or inspection, or as part of a submission, we can extract the relevant information from the master document, creating a new place in time record, whilst leaving the rheumatoid arthritis and vaccine data out of harm's way. This approach can go right the way down to all the other risk assessments, down to the risk management traceability matrix. The beauty of that being you only have one risk management traceability matrix to maintain and interrogate as part of our market activities. The final piece in this puzzle is the risk management summary report, which sadly I think needs to remain at the child level, mostly because the benefit risk analysis depends on the drug product as well as the delivery device. That said, no one's stopping you from having a parent record from which common pieces can be leveraged. Here's an example of what I mean in terms of the hazard analysis. The upper diagram shows a master preliminary hazard analysis in which I've included some example common hazards and some delivery related hazards for drugs A and B. If drugs C and D come along, I can add the new delivery related items at the bottom. Now along comes a query from a regulator asking to see hazard analysis for drug A. Naturally, you don't want them to see it from drug B, and you don't have to. You simply extract the common information from that which is pertinent to drug A. Similarly, if you're in an audit for drug B, you just extract the common and specific data, make a place in time record, which becomes obsolete at the end of use. Finally, here's an example of a master risk management traceability matrix for common hazards and those associated with all the drugs in the platform. For the sake of visibility, it's worth stating I've only shown the left side of the matrix. Obviously, the other side contains the risk control measures, etc. But I think this illustrates how you could implement a modular approach for your risk management files across the platform. It's also worth noting that you can trace to your drug product risk assessments using this approach by utilizing the methodology I showed earlier. So to recap in slightly different form, the majority of the documents generated as part of the risk management file have both a parent and child form. In the RMP, this can either be an overarching plan containing multiple appendices or a plan for the platform itself with supplementary documents describing the additional requirements and activities for each individual product. The common hazard library can be used to populate the parent preliminary hazard analysis. This is then augmented with hazards, hazardous situations and harms relating to dosing accounted with each new drug product. This gives a master document containing information from across the platform and all its related presentations. The child in this case relates to the snapshot report generated as a response to either an audit or regulatory query containing information relating to the platform and the drug product under review and serves as a place in time document to satisfy this request. The same also requires to all the other risk assessments and risk management traceability matrix. In the case of the ex-FMEAs, for example, you can develop common risk assessments containing the failure modes and use errors always encountered, regardless of the drug product, and use these to inform your master documents. In both cases, the ability to generate a snapshot report also applies in order to provide appropriate information in response to queries. Finally, each platform and drug product presentation will have its own risk management summary report, as these will definitely be requested. What you can do, however, is leverage information from previous reports to at least flesh out your discussion instead of starting from a blank page every time you have a new drug product. Thank you.
So I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the discussions we've been having within BioPhorum about platform development in associated with devices and combination products. So I'll try to cover 4 areas with kind of within this presentation. So a bit of an overview of kind of the current landscape, so kind of maybe the current state of platforms and devices, and then some of the discussions that we've been having. So some of the challenges and opportunities associated with platforms, maybe pitfalls and some lessons that have come through the discussion, and then end with just a quick nod and a look to the future around some potential topics for platforms. It's important, at this point that I say for very important legal reasons, this presentation is representing BioPhorum and not that of my employer GSK. So thanks for that. I will just start though with a quick introduction about myself. So I do work for GSK. I've been in with the device development and packaging department for the last 20 years. As I said, today I'll be representing BioPhorum as opposed to GSK. I think there's already been a very good introduction around what BioPhorum do, but the specific interaction that I've been collaborating on is around platforms, and really with a purpose to try and build a kind of a common approach for industry for platform development, increasing kind of the acceptance of platforms and perhaps reducing some of the risks associated with taking a platform approach. Also worth saying that Amy are also working on a similar topic around kind of standardizing platform approaches for devices and combination products. BioPhorum and Amy are kind of working a little bit in partnership with this, and certainly there's good kind of connection there. It's probably fair to say Amy are very much working on the how and the detail of building a platform, and BioPhorum have more of the focus on the why and some of the overall benefits of taking a platform approach. So start with an introduction, and perhaps it's good to start with what a platform is. A lot of you kind of may have kind of fond memories of platforms as children or possibly adults playing computer games, but for device engineers, platforms has become quite a tricky subject, so much so that even the word platform had become a bit of a dirty word. It wasn't kind of generally accepted from regulatory authorities, and it did kind of result in companies starting to use different language to avoid using the word platform, so things like bridging or leveraging. But through the discussions we've been having, I think there's kind of good alignment of what a platform approach is. It's it's a process by which information can get leveraged across multiple different drug products, and it's a system that can be used and scaled across different products. What it isn't is just using the same device over and over again. A platform approach is requiring a thought process and a structure associated with it up front, and aligning on that approach at the start. And so I think the presentation that was just given is a very good example of that. So we're going to do some polls in the middle of this presentation, so I'll pause there for a poll. I'm not sure who's going to share that.
Loic, are you conscious? There we are. It's
there. Scott, I can't see the screen, so do tell me when I'm okay to carry on.
Yeah, so there's a poll running, so please start adding your responses to that poll. It says, how advanced do you feel your company is with respect to platforms development? 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, or 5 stars, where 5 stars is you're at the leading edge, and 1 star is you're far behind and you need support and help with that. And there is a second part to that question as well, once we've got part 1 complete. So I can see responses coming in through. Yep.
And it'll still be in the chat as well if you want to keep going, Matt, because you can also just click on the chat and you should be able to answer as well.
Brilliant. Okay, I will carry on. Well, so some of you might be thinking that platforms are already quite well established in industry, and you'd be correct. Certainly at kind of that component and subsystem level, component manufacturers have been supplying standard components for to multiple different customers with kind of standardized data packages that will be the same across the board. The focus for BioPhorum has really been how can we kind of extend that approach to the kind of combination product level, and how can pharmaceutical companies better leverage this platform approach, and that's kind of triggered a couple of common themes through the discussions. One around making sure there's really good relationships with component suppliers and subsystem suppliers and pharmaceutical companies, very much that partnership relationship as opposed to kind of customer supplier relationship. And as I was saying at the start, that kind of upfront strategy of how data is going to be leveraged between from the platform to the individual drug products. And that probably leads on to kind of some of the challenges that we've had for platform approaches that have come through these conversations. First one being around how pharmaceutical companies are set up. They're really set up to deliver products. They're not set up to deliver platforms. So that can lead to challenges around kind of funding structures, organizational structures, and maybe governance, because it's really set up to deliver things on a product by product basis. There's also potentially a bit of a fear of change, so especially if there's a device that can already kind of technically perhaps deliver a drug product that's coming through, so why can't that just continue to be used over and over again, and maybe a bit of a fear of change. At this point, within BioPhorum, we often kind of lean on car analogies quite often. So for this one, there's maybe perhaps the analogy here of putting a brand new high technology kind of engine into perhaps a very old car. And I say apologies to any fans of the 2CV. But maybe the same can be said for kind of drug product, where you've got a huge amount of investment that's been put into the drug product and formulation process, but actually the main patient interaction is going to be with the device. And are we starting to devalue the product overall by putting that brand new product into a drug product into an old device? So yeah, as I say, some of the potential pitfalls here may be that that old device, it may not meet the regulatory standards of the day. You may kind of have a loss of competitive advantage because the device is just an old device, or even worse, the device just may not be appropriate for the patient population that it's attempting to be used for. And then obviously flipping that around, the investment at the right time in a platform technology could actually enable a new wave of drug products in the portfolio, and ultimately kind of reduce the costs and times to market for the products that would then be leveraging that platform. Within the BioPhorum, looking at this, we are kind of constructing a decision tree to help companies understand when might be the right time to help adopt platforms, and that's hopefully an output that will come from these discussions very soon. So continuing that with the sort of benefits and perhaps some of the opportunities of platforms. So a lot of you will be very familiar with the concept of configuration of platforms. So for an auto-injector, for an example, having different springs that can accommodate different viscosities, and then other components that might be changed, so plunger rod lengths, needle geometries, and things like that. So there's a clear benefit here that there's a core functionality that can be a data package can be developed for, and then there can be configurations within that. Again, there's a benefit here to understanding that design space up front, understanding the capabilities of the platform, both so that information can then be leveraged as we go forward, but also then for communications back perhaps to drug product and formulation teams, so they know what the capabilities of that platform will be, and that can support that development. Perhaps another concept here then is maybe evolution. So we're keeping the kind of the technology current while still maintaining that core functionality and still being able to leverage some of the data that's developed on that platform. So examples here might be perhaps an exchange of certain materials for more sustainable options, perhaps the inclusion of connectivity, where clearly some rework will have to be done, but not an entire rework of the platform, and that should minimize the effort here while still keeping the platform current. So final part really is just around some example approaches. So there's a lot of work going on, and as I said at the start, to understand the kind of the mechanism of and the process of how to build a platform. And as the previous presentation was a really good example of that. This is really perhaps just a high level kind of illustration of how the platform approach could be taken. So for this illustration, we may perhaps start with 3 products. They might be drug products, they might be mimics, but that would go to develop kind of the initial platform and perhaps the initial kind of platform the design history file. And then as we start to kind of move ahead, new products start coming through, and perhaps they fall into one of 3 categories. Either that new drug product falls directly within the bracket that's been established for the platform, in which case the data can be leveraged. It may require perhaps a modification or perhaps extension of the platform, but still can be used. So in which case there may be an element of rework that needs to be done, but then you perhaps have expanded the bracket that platform can work within. And that would enable a wider range for future products to adopt that platform. Or it may be that the platform just will not work with this drug product, and we have to start thinking about either a standalone device, perhaps does that trigger a decision to introduce a new platform, or perhaps is there a kind of a rework of what the requirements of that drug product need to be. In any case, though, that there will always be changes to the platform, and that might be due to kind of market feedback, scale-up requirements, and there needs to be a robust mechanism for managing that change, both kind of at the platform level, but then also for the products that are leveraging that platform, and making sure that mechanism is robust from the start is very important. So moving on to some maybe potential pitfalls. So again, a lot of the discussions here have been around where a platform has or a technology has a decision has been made to use a technology retrospectively as a platform. So perhaps it wasn't initially intended as a platform technology, but that decision was then made later. So why can this perhaps cause sort of complication? Often there can be a high level of customization or perhaps exclusivity with that initial product in combination with that technology, and it may be that that technology itself was developed with a single drug product in mind, so that maybe perhaps the funding came from one product. But what that can make it is very complicated then to do those updates when they're required, or the changes that may be needed to introduce a new product. It may be a design that's perhaps been fixed for an extended period of time, or it's just not been designed in such a way that update or ability to accommodate a new product is possible without kind of an extensive amount of rework. There's also been quite a bit of discussion on kind of supply chain risks and perhaps risks around the single sourcing of a platform technology. And again, that's where kind of very good, strong partnerships with suppliers are needed, and really robust supply agreements in place from the start, so that risk is effectively mitigated. And final slide on this, and again, I think Rick described this very well in terms of a modular approach. This is very much more of a kind of a high level graphic of that, but this is terminology that's being used around platforms quite generally, is building this through a modular approach, and that's understanding kind of data packages that can be leveraged at different levels. So in this instance, there's with kind of component level information, so generally information from suppliers, and making sure that the right agreements are in place to ensure that information can be transferred seamlessly to pharmaceutical companies that then would build an information pack at the platform level, and that would be the source of data that can then continue to be reused ultimately at the configuration specific level. And here again, it's very important to define up front the rationale as to why information can be leveraged from the platform for that particular use case. And we have one more poll before my final slide. Again, I'll just pause and Scott, if you can give me the okay when it's okay to carry on.
Yeah, it's still in the chat for everyone, so you can just click on that in the chat to view the poll. If you've answered question 1, great. If you haven't answered question 1, please do answer it. And then there's a slider at the bottom to move on to part 2 of the question, which is, have you had success in submitting platform approaches and gaining regulatory approval? So a number of options there for that question as well. So please jump in and give us your responses, please.
Brilliant.
So I think, Matt, you can probably just continue, and the results, I can see them, they are coming in, and hopefully they'll continue to come through.
Brilliant. Okay, and I will then just finish with my final slide. So just a kind of quick nod to what some potential future topics associated with platforms. So we know that kind of drug products and formulations do use platform technologies themselves. So potentially, is there an opportunity to start including some of the drug product properties within platform development and being able to leverage far more data at kind of the individual product level, again, further reducing rework and cost. Then secondly, maybe expanding on the use of modeling and simulation to really understand that design space of a platform, and if those simulations are appropriately validated, potentially could they start to be used more in regulatory submissions, perhaps replacing some of the need for the more labor intensive and costly testing that's typically needed. And then finally, whether there's increased use of AI could actually support creation of design history files and regulatory submissions, automatically kind of pulling information perhaps from the platform level to the product specific level, and again reducing costs and potentially enabling acceleration. And there was quite an interesting conversation at the SAE conference earlier on in the year around, a future scenario where AI is actually both compiling submissions and then also reviewing submissions, which is perhaps a bit of a scary thought. So I do have one more slide, apologies. So key kind of takeaways then. So there's a lot of discussion ongoing across industry around platform approaches and how to go about developing platforms for combination products. There's clear benefits, potential benefits there around reduced costs and timelines for bringing products to clinic and to market. There's clear advantage around configuration and evolution, and hopefully as well an improvement in kind of, or an increase in kind of quality and robustness associated with the manufacture at scale that's associated with platforms. There are some watch points, particularly around kind of a retrospective decision to make a technology a platform, and especially if there's a high degree of customization perhaps associated with that. And then, as I say, we've kind of touched on the kind of modular approach to how to then build a design history file to support that platform development. So with that, so if you are interested, obviously there's very active conversation going on within BioPhorum around this. So do speak to BioPhorum, and hopefully there'll be more output from this kind of like through the year, such that platforms become less challenging for device engineers and something that becomes a bit more of an enjoyable topic again. So I will close there. Thanks for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the invite from the BioPhorum team to present this again. We presented at the SAE conference in January. I'm Conor O'Neil, and I head our packaging development and design team in R&D in GSK, and I'm based in Ware. Matt is very close by, and I can confirm he is a very nice guy. I work with him a lot. But I also work with Dawn Jones, who has been a co-author on this presentation and is actually in the room here with me today. I'm also acknowledging Rob Veazey and the design team at DCA Design International, who have helped us to rethink sustainability and to develop new concepts, one of which I'll touch on in this presentation. Just as a bit of an outline, I'll talk about the sustainability imperative, how we grounded our vision for a pack of the future. Somebody said we should have called this Pack to the Future, so we missed a trip there. Uncovering the challenge, removing constraints, and then approaches that we've made in GSK to embed eco-design principles into product development, because sustainability quite often represents change, and change is difficult. So how do we bring teams along the journey? And speaking of journeys, there's some journey mapping from a product perspective, and how we can change the paradigm from a linear take make waste model to something that represents a more circular solution aligned to circular economy principles. This is the only kind of corporate statement I've got here, but it represents GSK's vision that isn't very different from a lot of pharmaceutical companies. We are committed to a net zero, nature positive and healthier planet, with ambitious goals set for 2030, which is now scarily just around the corner, and for 2045. Now, the climate impact, or the carbon impact in the healthcare industry is enormous. I've been to enough conferences, I've presented enough times and seen other people's presentations to have heard this statistic. So sorry if you've seen it before and you're bored by it, but if the healthcare system was a country, it would be the 5th or 6th largest emitter globally, behind India, Russia, US, China. So our contribution here is very large. That's typically the drug, right? Now, the role of packaging and the devices that we use to deliver our injectable products is relatively modest, somewhat small, but we believe it's a very visual feature that our patients experience, and that are then left with a task to do something about once they have completed their that dose. So Pack of the Future has been a research project in collaboration with a design agency to build sustainability resilience into our primary and secondary packaging and devices across the GSK landscape, fully aligned to our 2030 and 2045 goals. And our ambition has been to reduce the impact of our packaging and devices across our portfolio. We also believe very strongly that a considerate and conscious use of materials doesn't end with when we ship product leaving our factory gates, but how that material is managed. And currently, when packaging and device waste is used, or the medical device waste is treated, it's typically incinerated or lost to landfill. All of the value in the materials that are used to construct our packaging and our devices is then lost. And we as I speak to, we're often selecting high carbon embodied materials, and it's it's a waste that we are absolutely trying to avoid. So in our Pack the Future project, we wanted to explore new concepts that can be used in a circular economy sense. We did not want to design new packaging or new device technologies that had an impact upon the patient or their carers' experience in administering the medicines to the patient. So we have taken an inclusive design approach, or an inclusive design-led approach, to something that has sustainability as its backbone. We did give ourselves the option to rethink the system and a more of a clean sheet approach, not be constrained by the typical model or the default, or the conversation we've just heard that has been around platform. So not be so tied to the platform that we apply design constraints and remove all degrees of freedom. And we've absolutely recognized over the course of this project that there is a significant impact to the overall pack size related to design decisions, and addressing that allows us to address pulp and paper usage and inefficient space usage in our finished products. So other insights that we've unlocked from the research is the packaging and the devices that we have selected has always been to ensure that the patient safety needs comes first. That's non-negotiable, but it has also overridden considerations for the impact that they have on the environment. And over long periods of time, that has embedded hard to change defaults in our industry, starting with raw material selection. So the raw materials that we have selected and that we continue to select are based on their long-term experience with their processing and their converting, and a well characterization of their converting and their functional performance. So materials like PVC used in blister packs, the installed base of equipment that's used there, we have 45 years of experience with. The industry is trying to move away from that. We're now experiencing how we need to update the manufacturing technologies for this next generation of materials. That's just one example. As we have used those materials, the expectation to comply with a suite of global compendial standards it exists. And it's easier to select the same materials that comply with well understood methodologies for those requirements. And then standard designs emerge that then become adopted into industry standards like the ISO standards for prefilled syringes. So platformization and standardization has led to very entrenched technologies that are difficult to change. They're not a bad thing, right? Absolutely acknowledging that that common materials, designs, platforms allows us to manufacture technologies at scale and at a reduced cost, and at a therefore reduced financial burden to the patients or payers purchasing the medicine. But all of that comes at an environmental cost. So the example that I wanted to bring today is one of a legacy of design by default. When we look at the prefilled syringe, when it was not invented for use in an auto-injector. But we've taken prefilled syringes, typically our glass prefilled syringes, now ISO standard prefilled syringes, commonly the 1 ml long prefilled syringe, and then we decide to design an auto-injector around it. And how we design that auto-injector around that prefilled syringe means we need to include a power pack. We need to select high engineering plastics, essentially, which I'm calling high energy embodied plastics in this presentation, that then make up over 85% of the materials used in the device. And overall, of that device, only a tiny amount is the actual drug. Almost none of the materials that we select in an injectable devices are the commonly recycled plastics. They usually sit in that other bucket, and that's illustrated in this slide here. So in the middle section are the polymers or engineering plastics in the yellow bars. That are the typical plastics that are used in auto and pen injectors, or you'll commonly see one or more of these. They are energy or carbon intensive to produce. In contrast, the polyolefins and PET on this graph chart are not as energy intensive to produce, and they're also the same plastics for which there is a market to collect and to recycle. So the take-back schemes that we're seeing emerge are a good thing, but we are collecting materials for which there is a limited market for the resultant recyclate. Were we to select a material that is more commonly desired or requested by the recycling industry, we then embed more opportunities for circularity. We've taken these issues and we've tried to inspire a new design, and this is just one of the Pact the Future projects for something which is a more sustainable auto injector. So we've decided we don't want to be constrained by a 1 ml long ISO standard prefilled syringe. What if we chose, actually still respecting the utility of industry standards, but in this instance we've taken a 2.25 ml glass cane, a standard cane diameter. We've shortened the prefilled syringe. We've shortened the rigid needle shield. We've designed a device around it. We've developed a way by which we can constrain the power pack that allows us to select more conventional or commodity materials. So our auto injector is made from a single commodity plastic that is not an engineering plastic. It allows us to reduce the environmental footprint by over 73%. A reduction in size has allowed us to reduce the secondary packaging and pulp usage by again 73%. And in comparison to the auto injector technology that we currently use in GSK, where we're able to pack approximately exactly 1,200 auto injectors to a pallet, we can increase the densification by an order of magnitude, over 10,000 extra onto a pallet. This device is designed for disassembly to separate out the material fractions into glass, metals, and that single grade of plastic. And because it's a grade of plastic that is more recycled, we feel that it therefore has extra value in that end of the value chain. So we are progressing with this design. Earlier in the year, in this year, it was around about the same time as the SAE conference, we were conducting a usability study where we perform at least as good as our current standard auto injector that we use. We do recognise that whilst the size of the auto injector may have some advantages, there may be some patients who feel that they have better familiarity with the devices that they're more familiar with using. don't know if you can see me on camera, but this device is very small. It fits in the palm of my hand. I'm holding up to the camera right now. So it is still a standard 1 ml auto injector that we believe is probably the most sustainable auto injector that will get onto the market once we get there. I've chosen that as an example of how we can rethink the system and challenge design constraints, and more holistically within the organization. What we've tried to do is to embed the eco-design principles that have emerged from the Pack of the Future project into our ways of working within GSK, and present this in the context of if anybody's interested, well, how do you get this embedded within an organization? It's to make it a standard. It's to make this approach not a guidance or a nice to have, but something that sits on the must do side of the internal control framework for how we do business. So we're trying to move from the selection of heavier or more difficult to recycle materials, moving away from problematic plastics like PVC or the PFASs that are now going to be regulated, the removal of plastics from our secondary packaging, and the removal of leaflets and other pulp-based materials where regulations allow. And that's the important point in all of this, that we're building in design redundancy for where we would like regulations to go, but we accept that the regulatory environment needs to follow the aspiration, but we're trying to design in that redundancy if and when we get there. So we do want to introduce renewable polymer feedstocks, products that are and packaging that are more designed for the circular economy, and that allow for a more compact packing density overall. So I'm on my last few slides because I'm aware of time. This is the model that most companies use today. I also think a lot of companies are trying to move away from this model. We extract raw materials, we convert those materials, we fill and pack in our factories, we distribute, we go through one or more patient loops, depending on the therapy, but ultimately and most commonly, all pharmaceutical packaging, particularly injectable medicines, are seen as hazardous waste and are typically incinerated. We have seen the emergence of take-back schemes, and I'm an advocate of those, and our company is supportive of those, and I think we should be grateful for the companies that are leading the way on this. And we start to move away from diverting the materials to incineration or leakage to landfill. But still, the most common route for those materials is a mechanical recycling process, usually downcycling from a low-grade recycling, producing. Well, I'll say this: not a closed loop that is reintroduced as feedstock for an auto injector or considered high value materials. That would be our aspiration. That's one of the reasons why we've selected a commonly used commodity plastic for the auto injector as an example, and also as a principle for any project that comes out of the Pack of the Future initiative, it being a monoplastic that should be easier to separate and therefore easy to recycle, that we can introduce a closed loop, or sorry, a more virtuous loop, and that represents a circular and more virtuous material or feedstock that can be used as a co-feed with existing materials or separated from fossil materials completely.
Thank you very much to everyone that joined today, and thank you very much to the presenters. Thank you all. I know some of them had to jump off early. It was a great session, and what we'll be looking to do is we'll post the recording.